So, welcome friends. Today, our 50th webinar, non-stop from the time in June 2020 we started. We have gone from first webinar of 91 people to now a regular webinar having 400 attendance, 400 plus, and COVID webinars having attracted 700 plus. In these 50 webinars, we have brought you excellent speakers. We have brought you kings of teachers, and all of you have been very, very receptive. And as is our tradition at Inches, we don't like to waste time. So it gives me tremendous pleasure to invite one of my colleagues, my classmates from GS Medical College, and a very good friend. See, everybody we can call a good friend who studied with us, but Suhas Prabhu, myself, and about 10 other doctors, we meet once in 3 months to enjoy our college days, reminisce about our college days. And then I used to talk to Suhas, and Suhas would say, Chandu, I only take lectures for pediatricians. So last time I brought him here, I requested him to take a talk for all of us on fever, and he agreed. And he was so impressed by the love shown by all participants that now when I approached him to come and tell us about COVID in children, he agreed. So he's coming here not only as Dr. Suhas Prabhu, a pediatrician, but convener of the task force for pediatric COVID in Government of Maharashtra. A very big honor. Please welcome him. Big hand. All of you put on your videos and welcome him.
Thank you.
Come on, Suhas.
Thank you.
Now, it is for you. And all of you be ready. Once the talk is over and questions begin, we have a surprise for you. And Suhas, you may have to wait beyond 7:30 because I'm sure there will be lot questions.
I have kept the evening free.
Thank you very much. So over to Dr. Suhas Prabhu on managing COVID in children.
So while my first slide is already up and Dr. Asrani has said we don't like to waste time in Inches program, I'd still like to take a few of your precious minutes to say a few words. One thing is, while I did mention to Dr. Asrani that I generally talk to pediatricians, that in no way means that I consider family physicians as in any way inferior. In fact, I think family physicians are the backbone of healthcare in society even today. I have great regards for them. My father was a family practitioner for 50 years, 50 years. For a whole 50 years and more, I think it was almost 51 years, he diligently went to his dispensary. And I know that his dedication to his patients must be reflected even today in many of the family practitioners who are listening to me today. I know that family practitioners have it difficult, that they have to know at least a little bit about everything. I have it easy. I can just say I'm a pediatrician, that too I am very good only at maybe infectious disease, vaccination and things like that. For pediatric congenital heart disease, I don't know, ask somebody else. The family practitioner cannot say that. He has to know something of everything. And medical science is changing a lot, changes so rapidly. So I think it's very important to have continuing medical education, especially for family practitioners. And therefore, I think these Inches workshops and the great work that Inches has been doing so far is very important to keep the family practitioners up to date. And I am very happy to give my little humble contribution to this in whatever little field that I know. I also know that family practitioners are more than just a doctor for their patient. They have a very close relationship with the family. They are almost like family members. And this has some connection to what I am going to speak about today. Some of you might have heard this presentation, which was done on the 23rd of May on our Honorable CM's Facebook page. And I had the honor of doing this workshop on his Facebook page with him in attendance, giving the introductory remarks. And I have opted to use the same module here for several reasons, which I will tell you later. But before that, I want to mention to you one thing that Saab said. I don't know how many of you heard that session that day. He said the crux of healthcare has to be a concept which he called Maza doctor. He was speaking in Marathi, of course. He said Maza doctor, my doctor, somebody that the family or the patient can claim as their own, that somebody that they can rely on, somebody they can approach, somebody they can refer to, somebody they can look up to, somebody that in whom they can have blind faith. You are those kind of people. Consultants are not like that. We give our consultation and then we are out of the picture more or less. Although I must say that as a pediatrician, there are several patients who come to me primarily for their children. But of course, I am not their physician for the entire family. So you have that standing. You are the Maza doctor. And Uddhav Sahib in his words very clearly said that Maza doctor is the crux of healthcare in any society, and particularly when we are going to talk about management of COVID-19, especially in children in the third wave. So you people have a very important role to play. And as I said earlier, my congratulations to Inches for this 50th Golden Workshop. And I think it's my honor that Dr. Asrani asked me to take this. So with these words of introduction, I'm going to come to the topic today. And that's pediatric COVID-19. And I'm going to do this field training workshop that we did on the 23rd of May. I'm going to use exactly the same slides. And that's not because I'm lazy to make my own slides. But there are several reasons. One thing is the fact that this is the official recommendation of the government of Maharashtra for pediatric COVID. I mean, we were given this task of advising the government. The government has accepted this, and this is going to be now coming out in the Gazette. This is also going to be distributed to all public health hospitals. And therefore, I think we need to be in tune with what the government is doing for pediatric COVID-19. Otherwise, there is confusion. We know what happened in tuberculosis, pediatric tuberculosis, particularly till about 4 or 5 years ago. The private practitioners were doing something different in treating pediatric tuberculosis. And the government had their own system, DOT system, thrice-a-week therapy, which nobody in the private sector practiced. And there was so much confusion. Till the government and the private sector shook hands. I happened to be there in that meeting, several meetings which happened in Delhi. And we said, we must be on the same platform. We must be on the same page. We should be doing the same thing so that nobody is confused. And I think the same kind of scenario holds true whenever there is a big epidemic or pandemic like COVID-19. We must all talk together in the same language, whether we are in the private practice or whether we are in the government sector. So that's why I'm taking this same workshop, this same slide module. Secondly, this slide module is, you are not getting the benefit of just one expert. We were 10 people in the task force. You will see their pictures shortly, who all sat down and we had several meetings where we have made this workshop. So you're getting the benefit of 10 experts talking to you today from one mouth. Third is, while you may say that the same module was taken on the 23rd of May, why take the same again? I can give you a couple of reasons for that. One is the fact that when I spoke on the 23rd of May, if some of you did listen, and I know there were 6,500 doctors who listened, and a total audience of 84,000 for that webinar that happened on the 23rd of May. There were 6,300 doctors, as I said. But I spoke primarily in Marathi, which might be not such a familiar language for many of you. And therefore, I thought I should repeat those same slides, but in English. And lastly, of course, in today's webinar, you will have the opportunity of having to interact with me and ask questions, which hopefully I can answer you. So with this introduction, I want to start the program today. And this is the formal official field training workshop for pediatric COVID-19 for the government of Maharashtra as decided by the task force. These are the members of the task force. I must mention their names. They've all contributed to this module. Dr. Vijay Yevle, who's at Apollo Hospital at Navi Mumbai, Dr. Parmala Nandankar from Jupiter Hospital, Thane, Dr. Samir Dalwai, who's at Cooper, Khar Hinduja, and has his own New Horizons centers, Dr. Jitendra Gawane at MGM Medical College, Panvel, Dr. Vinay Joshi at SRCC, Dr. Bakul Parekh, whom you all know as a pediatrician in Ghatkopar and the past president of IAP, Dr. Sudha Rao from Wadia, Dr. Sushma Save from Nair Hospital, and Dr. Bela Verma from JJ. And I must confess that these people have been invaluable to me in helping to design this module. Because while I am heading this task force, I cannot claim to have any personal experience in treating COVID-19 serious cases in the ICU. Because of my age and other reasons, I have not actually worked in a COVID positive PICU, although I have treated patients in the outpatient like many of you must have. Also, that is, while their inputs are important, I must mention to you that this module will emphasize primarily the care that a family pediatrician can do. There will be, of course, a little bit on the management of COVID in the hospital, but this module is primarily designed to talk about care in the outpatients area. So let me start now. We know that SARS-CoV-2 in children can present in two ways, unlike in adults. First is the acute COVID illness. And you are all familiar. You must have seen several adults who present with COVID. It starts like with a flu-like illness, with some sore throat, headache, fever, body ache, back pain, some cough, and of course, loss of smell and taste. And the presentation is pretty similar in children, although children can have some differences. One is the fact that symptoms like loss of smell and taste are difficult to elicit in a small child. So we don't really know what is the incidence in them. Secondly, some children present with GI symptoms. They are much more common than in adults. They can present with vomiting, abdominal pain, some loose motions, and so on. And in some children, the stomach pain is so severe that in some patients, the doctor has even thought, am I missing an appendicitis? So there are some differences. The other major difference is that in the majority, it says over 90%, but the figure will probably be more closer to 95% or more. The acute COVID illness is a very mild disease. There is a quick and complete recovery, usually within 1 week, and complications are much rarer than they are in adults. However, complications can occur, like COVID pneumonia and other complications, but as I said, the incidence is much less. The second condition that the SARS-CoV-2 virus can cause after infection in children is a condition called multisystem inflammatory syndrome. When it occurs in children, we refer to it as MISC, but can also occur in neonates when we use the term MISN. Now, this can occur from few weeks, often as early as second week, to few months, sometimes as late as 10 to 12 weeks after the acute COVID illness. Now, the important thing is, as I will tell you later, I mentioned that the acute COVID illness is very mild. It can also be almost totally asymptomatic. So what happens is the fact that this acute COVID illness, which occurred earlier, may have been totally missed. And therefore, the children present to you directly with the MISC. So you need to be aware that you can get a direct presentation of MISC, and the earlier acute COVID illness might not have presented to you or have been totally missed because the child was asymptomatic. The MISN occurs in neonates when they are born to COVID positive mothers in the third trimester or just before delivery. Now, the etiology of the multisystem inflammatory syndrome, and I'm not going to go into the theoretical details, they don't really concern us, is believed to be because of the antibodies that are generated in the body, the anti-SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. And these antibodies cause a kind of an autoimmune reaction or a cytokine storm. And this is the reason why you get this multisystem inflammatory syndrome. It's something like what you see in dengue. Like you get in the second week of dengue, children presenting with all kinds of course, not these kind of symptoms, different symptoms with shock, third spacing, edema, and so on. So it's something like that. It's antibody mediated. And therefore, we are going to look at the antibodies to make a diagnosis and not necessarily the antigen testing or the RT-PCR. So these are the two ways in which SARS-CoV-2 in children can present. Now, as I mentioned to you, in 90 to 95%, COVID in children is asymptomatic or a very mild disease. Mild just can mimic any ordinary simple upper respiratory tract viral infection. In about 5%, it is moderate. I'm going to describe to you what are the signs and symptoms of moderate COVID and what we need to do. And only about 1 or 2%, it can be severe, presents with pneumonia and other complications. And even MISC and MISN, we prefer to put in severe because here the child can deteriorate very rapidly, like you've seen happen in dengue and other conditions. And therefore, it would not be wise, although the child may appear mild, except in the mildest of cases, to consider treating these patients at home. So obviously, when you have severe pneumonia, you're going to need high-level treatment in the COVID care, in the COVID care PICU or high dependency unit. The moderate COVIDs are managed in pediatric COVID care hospitals, that is in the general wards of the pediatric hospital, which are dedicated to COVID, so that there's no mixing or transmission of infection between COVID and non-COVID patients. But this vast majority here on the left, 90 to 95%, can be managed on home care. And this is where you all are going to play a very, very important role. You are the MASA doctor for the patients, and your role is vital. If the third wave really comes, believe me, you are going to be you are larger in number, you are closer to the patient, and you are going to be empowered, hopefully by the end of my talk, or even from other knowledge sources, that you will know what to do when you see a COVID patient. I'm sure many of you by now have already attended various webinars and are fully aware, but I will try to do my bit today. So what is this home care? This home care means the patient is treated at home and is followed up daily by the doctor in the fever clinic. And this follow-up is by teleconsultation. The patient does not come to your clinic every day. There are several reasons for this, but the most obvious and important reason is the fact that you don't want him to come to your clinic and spread the disease to other patients who are waiting in your clinic. If he is mild and asymptomatic, he does not need to be actually physically examined, and therefore he needs to stay at home. He is in quarantine, remember, and therefore should not go out unless he deteriorates to moderate or severe, which I will discuss later. So he's going to be followed up in this fever clinic. Now, what is this fever clinic? Now, what is this concept of fever clinic? Now, the concept of fever clinic comes because I know you are seeing from yesterday the onset of the monsoon. And in Mumbai, we know that the monsoon season comes accompanied by not just one viral infection or one infection, but so many. This is a season where we will later on in this next month or so, we start seeing malaria, we will start seeing dengue, we will start seeing maybe leptospirosis and maybe typhoid and so many other monsoon-related illnesses. And what happens is that when the patient comes with fever, the mother or the parent at home has no idea whether it's COVID or it's any of the other symptoms. So essentially, the child comes with fever, which is usually the first symptoms even in COVID, and in the first symptom in any of the other infections that I mentioned to you. So the concept is that when the child has fever, he goes to a fever clinic, and where an empowered doctor like you knows what to do to see and attend to these children and do what needs to be done. So the fever clinic is the first point of contact for medical aid to all children with fever as the main or possibly the sole symptom. Sometimes fever is the only symptom, there are no other symptoms. So what is the role of the doctor in this fever clinic? What is the role? The first question, ask yourself, is it likely to be COVID or a non-COVID illness? I just mentioned to you there are going to be so many other fever, monsoon-related illnesses, which all are going to come with fever. And very important, if it's COVID, then testing is required for several reasons. One thing is we need epidemiological data. We need to know exactly how many patients are there. There is an issue about quarantine, and there's possibly issue about monitoring this child separately so that we want to see that it does not deteriorate into moderate or severe COVID. Whereas if it's just a simple viral URTI, non-COVID, then you need not be so worried to take all this precaution. So your first step should be, is it COVID or is it non-COVID? That thought should come to your mind. And I would request all of you that in the coming 3-4 months, when the third wave will come to us, that let the thought cross your mind, is it COVID? Because certain steps we'll have to take if it is COVID. Because if it is COVID, which is likely or proven, you need to do the triage. You need to decide, as I told you on the previous slide, what is the severity of this COVID. If it is a severe case, your job is to direct the patient straight away to a pediatric COVID care PICU or HTU. If it's a moderate care case, and I'm just repeating something, I'm sure you've been doing this for your adult patients, but this is what you'll be doing for your pediatric patients too. You will refer the moderate cases to a pediatric COVID care hospital, which may be in the government or in the private sector. And if it's a mild case, home management. And that's going to be the majority of cases, over 90-95% of them. So what's your role in home management? If it's home management, then you are the whole and soul for that patient. So your management there should consist of instructing the patients on home management. You have to tell them what to do, what not to do. You have to instruct them in the red flag signs, which will tell you your patient is going from mild to moderate or severe. And of course, you have to do this daily follow-up at a distance, either till the patient recovers or unfortunately he deteriorates and needs referral. So this is your role as the fever clinic doctor. So let me give you an example. Let's start with a case. I always believe in showing cases because that really tells you what will happen when the patient comes to you in your clinic. Now, this is a 13-month-old child who's having fever since 2 days. I mean, a common scenario is going to happen. He comes to you to your clinic. First question, as I said, should come to your mind is, could it be COVID? That thought has to cross to your mind in the next few months till this pandemic is waned. Remember, it's going to be difficult. The symptoms and signs of COVID-19 are non-specific in a child and can mimic any other minor viral illness, or maybe some other bacterial illness also to start with, or even malaria. So how do we try and distinguish whether it's COVID or not? You're going to ask for these 3 things. We have been taught this in our undergraduate. Onset and trend. How did it start? How did it proceed? Is it gradually getting worse? Is it intermittent fever? Very important question is, how is the child in the interfebrile period? Because in the interfebrile period, if the child is well, then it's very likely that this is a viral illness. And of course, viral illness can include COVID. Then very important to ask for the associated symptoms. I have listed some of those that I told you earlier, can occur in children with COVID, but I'm going to put some of them down here also. Headache, myalgia, there is body ache, fatigue, tiredness, coryza, less commonly compared to other viral illnesses, but yes, you can have a stuffy nose or even loss of smell, cough, sore throat, rapid breathing if it's proceeded to a pneumonia, and as I mentioned, even abdominal symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. If these symptoms are there, you should be alerted that is this possibly COVID? 2 days history of fever with these symptoms can be COVID. So how do you narrow down to say, is it COVID or not? One thing you ask is there a history of a close or household contact with COVID? तुम्हारा चाली में है क्या और कोई पेशेंट कोविड का? Were you being put in a quarantine zone by the municipality? Or is somebody else at home having fever? And so on. Or actually diagnosed with COVID with an RT-PCR. One very important history you need to ask is whether the child had fever in the past 2 to 3 months. Why is that? Because we're thinking of MISC. I mentioned to you that MISC can occur a few weeks up to 3 months after the primary illness, which might have been so mild that the child didn't even go to a doctor. But on inquiry, if the parent tells you that my child had fever 2-3 months ago, then MISC must come to your mind. MISC, remember, also again comes with fever. Comorbidities are important because that's going to help you decide your line of management. If the child is very obese, and I have seen 12-13-year-olds who sometimes weigh 65 kilograms, or has an associated chronic lung or heart disease, then your approach might be different. Very important to ask the family and housing details, because when you're managing at home and you want to quarantine the child, you must know what are the details at home. How many rooms are there? How many family members are there? Who are there? What are their ages? What are their comorbidities? Are all very important data. Okay, all this is what you're going to do in your clinic. What about the COVID test? Now, if you really suspect, based on these features, or these features, that there's a history of contact and so on, or there's a comorbidity and you're worried that you should not miss a COVID, then testing is recommended for all suspect cases. What would you do? We would, of course, do a RT-PCR, or you could even do a rapid antigen test if RT-PCR sounds too expensive or is not easily available. I know that now RT-PCR is available, but there was a time about 2 months ago when RT-PCR, you had a 2-day wait. So if you have to wait, please do a rapid antigen test. Now you will see something written on this slide, says that if resources are scarce, testing may be deferred for children with mild symptoms. Now resources are scarce. Remember, I told you earlier, this is a common module for right from the smallest village in Maharashtra to Mumbai city. So we know that the RT-PCR and the rapid antigen test is not available in small villages, which is why this has been listed here. And you might also consider that if you have an extremely poor patient who for some reason doesn't want to go to a municipal hospital where this test might be done free, and he has no comorbidities, he has mild symptoms, he is well known to you, and you have reasonable grounds to say that it is most likely COVID because there's another family member with COVID, there's a positive contact, you can label this child as a probable COVID and treat him accordingly and save the resources and the patient's money from doing a test. But remember, you have to treat it as a probable COVID. If you have to do a test, as I mentioned, it's the rapid antigen test or the RT-PCR. And remember, if the rapid antigen test is negative, but you strongly suspect, please do a RT-PCR that is much more sensitive than the rapid antigen test. So this is going to be your flow chart for a patient who comes to you with fever when you are the Maza doctor in the fever clinic. Now let's see what happens to this patient. Let's carry on with this patient, this 13-month-old child. What does he have? You inquire. He has mild fever since yesterday morning. The mother says he has no cough, cold or vomiting. There's nothing you can see on physical examination except the little fever. The father, on inquiry, the mother says the father is under home isolation since 5 days because he has been told to be COVID. The mother has no symptoms, so she's not been tested, and she's breastfeeding this 13-month-old baby. Who else is there in the family? There's an older brother to this child who may be 4-5 years of age. There's a father, of course, and there's a 65-year-old grandmother. They live in a 2-room apartment with a common toilet. Okay, this is your background. What's your diagnosis so far? Now, if you opt not to do the test in this patient, and you can, because there is a COVID contact, there's mild fever, there are no comorbidities, so you can say that this is probable COVID without doing testing, or if you have done the test, you will call it confirmed, whether it's confirmed by RAT or by the RT-PCR. If it's positive, this is a confirmed. Now, how do we ascertain that this is only mild? 3 or 4 things you need to think of. I'm trying to hide this because you can't see the top. Anyway, it's not working. But anyway, 3 important things you need to look at. One is look for fast breathing, because that means this is not just a upper respiratory tract involvement, there's a lower respiratory tract involvement or a pneumonia. Some children can get CNS involvement. They can present with lethargy, somnolence, or seizures. And of course, since the child can present with GI symptoms like diarrhea and vomiting, he can have dehydration. So if any of these 3-4 symptoms are there, then this is not mild. Then you cannot call this child call this child a mild COVID. Now, very important is fast breathing. Of course, you are all doctors practicing for years, so you will know that this is your cutoff respiratory rates to say that this is a pneumonia. These are WHO guidelines. You must be all familiar with them. Below 2 months, up to 60 is normal. 2 to 11 months, 50 per minute. 1 to 5 years, 40 per minute. And more than 5 years, 30 per minute. Of course, in adolescents, even 20 per minute is sort of borderline. But you need to actually measure this respiratory rate to make sure that there is no lower respiratory tract involvement. Okay, we've done all this. What next? We are confirmed that this is mild COVID. We are saying this is mild COVID, whether it's probable or confirmed. Kya karenge? What will you do? What is next? Check whether there are any comorbidities. Double check. And they are listed here. Cardiovascular diseases, blood pressure, of course, is uncommon in children, but there may be an occasional child who's got kidney failure or something, has got heart or aorta arthritis, or has got coarctation of aorta and is having high blood pressure, diabetes, immunocompromised. You know this list, the same as in adults, and even some children, as I mentioned, can be obese. These are your comorbidities if they are present and there is no ready access to healthcare. This child is staying far away from you. They are not very educated. They are not very smart. They will not know when to come back to you if the child is worse. It might be safer to admit this child, although it is mild, to a pediatric COVID care center. If, however, there is ready access to healthcare and the attendants are reliable, you can continue home care on this patient under your responsibility, like you would do for a mild case. And if they are not there, then of course you are going to do home care. Now, what is this supervised home care? The most important thing is the 14-day quarantine, because we don't want this patient to spread the disease to others. We have to control the pandemic. Transmission has to be interrupted. And therefore, this quarantine has to be strictly enforced and emphasized to the parents. Now, in this home, remember, we have a 65-year-old grandmother who is in the high-risk group. Now, hopefully, she would have received the vaccine, but if she has not, or even if she has received, it might be better to separate the child from the grandmother because we don't want her to be infected. And remember, we mentioned that there are 2 rooms in this apartment, so possibly the child can stay in one room and the grandmother should be separated in the other room. However, all family members in the same house, and those definitely who are in the same room, must wear a mask. This will include the older child who's 4 or 5 years of age. However, children below 2 years of age need not wear a mask because they may not wear it properly. They'll remove it often. Plus, in a very small child, there might be difficulty in breathing and suffocation. This next line sounds very simple, but I know that patients will eat your head about this. What can the child eat? What he cannot eat? Can he have a banana? Is milk okay? And so on. So very important to tell them that full normal diet is allowed. There are no restrictions in the diet. But of course, extra fluid intake is ideal, like in any viral or acute illness or fever. And very important, this is a breastfeeding mother. She should continue breastfeeding. Older children, we can advise warm saline gargles. The treatment to be advised is only symptomatic. No antibiotics and no tests are required, not even a complete blood count if you are reasonably certain it's COVID. You will do tests, of course, if you can't rule out or you're thinking possibility of, say, malaria or dengue or anything else. Yes, you will do those investigations. But for COVID per se, no tests are required for these mild cases whom we are going to give supervised telecare at home. No antibiotics are recommended of any kind, including doxycycline, azithromycin, or anything else. It's a viral infection. None of these antibiotics act on them. Okay, what is the symptomatic treatment? I won't go into that. It is, of course, paracetamol for the fever. If the child is vomiting, some ondansetron, some ORS for diarrhea and zinc and so on. And if the running nose is bad, you might use some antihistaminic like cetirizine and so on. I mean, you know all that. You don't need me to tell you what to do for that. But what is the home monitoring? We said supervise. Who's to do the supervision? Yes, the monitoring has to be done at home by the parent. And in rural areas, we have suggested to the government that the Anganwadi worker or the Asha Tais, what they are called, are the persons who can assist uneducated or illiterate parents in doing this monitoring at home. What do you monitor? 5 things: temperature, pulse, SpO2, urine output, and rate of breathing. 5 things to watch out for. And you have to keep a chart. I'm going to come to the chart in the next slide. But before that, what do you do after recording this? You have to report daily to the fever clinic. That is to you, the family physicians who are listening to me. The patient reports to you daily. I have done this in the last 7-8 months. You can choose a time when they report, when you are relatively free. I used to say at the end of the day, around 9 or 10 o'clock. But you can choose a little earlier time, whatever time is free to you. It's easy to report, not necessarily by phone. If you are disturbed, the patient can just WhatsApp to you. And we have proposed that in rural areas where they may not have a smartphone or be smart enough or well connected, the Anganwadi worker or Asha Tai can visit home and take this record and convey it to the fever clinic. And this is the record that needs to be maintained by the patient at home. 3 or 4 times a day is enough. This chart lists 3 times a day, but you can do 4 times a day. You put the day and the date here. The 5 parameters I've already mentioned to you. Other symptoms, if anything unusual comes like a rash or red lips or some vomiting or something, can be listed here. Again, for the patient's reference, and I would suggest you give printed copies to the patient, and they can be as written here in vernacular if the patient cannot understand English. The government is going to print this in Marathi and Hindi for rural areas and give it to the patients. You can do the same. So you print here the cutoff respiratory rates because they may not be aware. The cutoff danger for the other parameters like temperature over 102, SpO2 less than 94, and for urine output, not pass urine for 6 hours. Okay. Now, one question may come to you is how to measure the SpO2. Now, one thing, I think many people in Mumbai at least have a pulse oximeter at home. Those who have not can easily purchase one. It's freely available now. But I know that there will be some people who are listening to me from peripheries of Maharashtra and I know Inches has a good reach. Dr. Asrani, I'm sure you have people who are from all over the state who are listening to this webinar. So there, an SpO2 monitor may not be available at home. The government will provide on loan a pulse oximeter for a week or 10 days as much as required so that this monitoring can be done by the patient and the oximeter can be returned back. So the parent or the caregiver or the Anganwadi worker is going to record this. It can be read out on the phone, can be photographed and sent on WhatsApp or shown to the Anganwadi worker daily. So for you, those are living in Bombay, the patient will call you or WhatsApp you at the end of the day or any designated time. Okay, so this is what we said. This is what we are going to do. But very important, this doesn't end here. We have to watch for the red flag signs. And if the red flag signs appear, the fever clinic staff or here the family doctor has to be immediately informed. So what are these red flags? I'm going to go through them one by one. Persistent fever more than 3 or 4 days. I mentioned to you right at the beginning that in most children with mild COVID, it's a very short illness, 3 or 4 days, and then the patient is fine. If the fever goes on longer, think whether complications are occurring and this is going to turn out to be moderate or something else. Decreased urine output, I mentioned more than 6 hours, anuria, lethargy, drowsiness, rapid breathing, we have described the rates. Hypoxia, of course, all of you know, less than 94 is the cutoff. Presence of rash, red eyes, red lips are features of MIS-C I will discuss them in little detail later. Convulsions, altered sensorium, of course. These are all symptoms of moderate disease, at least if not severe. So if you see any of these red flag signs, and these have to be told to the parent before you send home at the first visit when you make the diagnosis of COVID, watch out for this. And if these happen, don't wait for the end of the day. Let me know immediately. And then the child can be referred to a COVID care center. So let's see what happens to our 13-year-old child. On day 4 of illness, the child is still running fever, it's 101. The mother feels the child is dull and lethargic, is not eating at all, and she's saying he's not passing enough urine. There doesn't seem to be any breathing difficulty, but there is tachycardia, which of course is easy for us. She doesn't have to look at the pulse. You can simply look at the pulse oximeter and get the pulse read. So what is she supposed to do? She's supposed to inform the doctor in the fever clinic. So what's your next step? What are you going to do now? Remember, in this child, if you have not done the RT-PCR test, then you have, first of all, remember, you're not even sure this is COVID. We are assuming it's COVID because there's a COVID patient at home. So the first thing you do is that first consider whether what the mother is saying is correct. Some mothers tend to exaggerate. So just try and assess whether this is truly a moderate disease or not. So you assess that. You also look at what is the status of the COVID test in this patient, the RAT or the RT-PCR if it has been done. If it has been done and it's positive, then you would say that this is most likely a mild COVID that is now developing into moderate. So you're going to directly admit this child to a pediatric COVID care hospital or center. How to admit there? Remember, the child doesn't go alone. He goes with the family member or an attendant. Now, we have proposed this to the government, and I think you know that in most pediatric nursing homes, even in non-COVID, there always is the mother or some attendant with the patient. Now, so we are also proposing that even in the COVID care hospital, the mother or some family member should be there. Several reasons. One is that this will assist in the care of the child. It will reduce the anxiety in the child as well as the parent. All of you know the anxiety when an adult is admitted in the COVID ward in the last 7-8 months, and the parents say, "हमको डॉक्टर बात नहीं करता है, पता नहीं उसको क्या हो गया, we can't even see him, we can't visit him." So that problem is solved when the family member is already there. But preferably, and also as I mentioned, this mother is breastfeeding. We want her to continue. So the mother has to be there. But if you have a choice, try to choose a family member who is either recovered from disease or is already vaccinated, because that person will have less chance of acquiring infection when he or she is in the pediatric COVID care center. But if the RT-PCR or the RAT was negative or has not been done, then of course cannot be directly admitted to a COVID care hospital because they want the test first. So what you do is you admit to a holding area, and we have proposed that the government have holding areas in rural hospital or PSC, and you know that even in Mumbai, corporate hospitals and most hospitals have a holding area where the child, when he first comes and is doubtful COVID, is held there till the test decides whether it's truly COVID or not. And what test we do here? We generally opt to do a rapid antigen test because we get the result within an hour or two. If it's positive, then we send him to the pediatric COVID care hospital. If it is negative, so if you have one test negative and a second test negative, then remember, you can't label this patient as COVID, even considering the fact that there is a father at home who's COVID positive. You will have to think and send this patient to a non-COVID hospital. Think of other causes also, while keeping in mind that this might be the rare case who's got a negative test twice and might still be COVID. But I'm not going to discuss the care or management of a non-COVID patient. I'm going to talk now that suppose this patient is now a moderate COVID. His RAT is positive or his PCR is positive, and now he's in the PCCH. Now I'm going to run through the next few slides. This is going to tell you what is the care of a child in a moderate COVID in a pediatric child care hospital, and later on also severe. But I'm going to just run through this because I don't think you will be treating any of these, but you need to know so that you can advise the patients on what is going on. What are the investigations that we do on admission for a moderate COVID? A CBC, there are certain indices about the lymphocyte lymphopenia, The CRP, if it's highly elevated, suggests an antibody response or an immune-mediated or cytokine reaction. SGPT, liver involvement, is fairly common. Low albumin is a feature of MIS-C. Serum creatinine is important because some children may have oliguria, decreased urine output, and also it is an important prerequisite for deciding about remdesivir, which of course we use very sparingly. Electrolytes, there can be electrolyte disturbance in MIS-C. A chest X-ray, of course, to look for a COVID pneumonia, and additional investigations as per the comorbidities of the patient. He may be a diabetic, so he needs sugar. He may have a heart disease, so he may need something else, and so on. Now, one thing you will notice here is missing is an HRCT. There is no indication to do an HRCT in pediatric COVID. There is not going to be any additional information to you that is going to help you to change your line of management, except in one situation, which I will tell you shortly. When you have a COVID pneumonia with a drop in SaO2, and you will definitely have some features on the chest X-ray, there is no additional information from the management point of view that an HRCT can give you. There may be signs of a pneumonia, infiltrates, whatever. Your management is not going to change even if the HRCT is normal. So therefore, there is no point in doing an HRCT. We are also concerned about the amount of radiation in HRCT. Children have a developing brain, and radiation which is very radiation sensitive, at least in the first 3-4 years of life, and therefore don't lightly undertake an HRCT in children. I am suggesting to you that you never do it. Okay, what monitoring is done once the child is admitted? TPR 4 hourly, the blood pressure recording. SpO2 is done 2 hourly. If it's above 94, that means, of course, it's less than, it may be, if it's less than 94, then if it's, once it crosses 94, then you can do the next one after 2 hours. But if it's below 94, between 90 and 94, you do continuous SpO2 monitoring. You look at the neurological signs, awake, vocalizing, response to pain, and unconscious. This is a very simple way of looking at the neurological status. Is done 8 hourly, of course, an intake output chart, and additional monitoring as per the comorbidities. What is the treatment that is given to the child? Supportive care, well hydrated, particularly if the child is vomiting or not eating, IV fluids, nutrition, paracetamol for the fever, nasal saline for nose block, other symptomatic treatment, whatever the symptoms are. Some multivitamin supplements may be given, although there's no real evidence that they work. And if you have to give inhalation therapy, prefer a meter dose inhaler with spacer compared and not a nebulization, because nebulization is aerosol generating, so that will cause transmission, higher rate of transmission to other people in the PCCH. You might use antimicrobials. We are recommending the drug to start empirically till you identify the cause as ceftriaxone, but only if there's evidence of bacterial infection. Again, all children admitted with moderate COVID-19 will not receive antibiotics, and of course, treatment of the comorbidities. Additionally, if there is hypoxia, the SpO2 is less than 94, we're going to give oxygen as device with a device that is appropriate for age, nasal prong, mask, oxyhood, or NRBM. Awake proning in an older child is beneficial. Steroids are recommended for every person who's hypoxic, but never before hypoxia. So please never use dexamethasone at home. Remember, home care is only for mild cases. So no child who's at home should receive steroid, because there is evidence that if you give steroids too early for mild cases, there is a chance of deterioration and complications. So please never give dexamethasone or any steroid to a child who's on home care. Remdesivir, now the latest guidelines actually say that remdesivir has to be very sparingly used. You must have seen the guideline that came recently, just a few days ago. And it says that if you want to use remdesivir, you require a senior consultant's opinion. So like remdesivir, not been shown to be very useful, can be given for 5 days, but only in those patients where oxygen requirement is increasing and is not responding to the dexamethasone therapy that you are advising. And of course, there are certain contraindications. I won't go into that because you will not be generally doing this. When will the child be discharged from the pediatric COVID care hospital? Criteria for discharge are no fever for more than 3 days, and the child is stable, or 10 days from onset of symptoms, whichever is later. You need to remember that such child should preferably not receive vaccinations if they are scheduled for 4 weeks from the onset of the disease or roughly 2 weeks after discharge. And he should try and ensure completion of the routine vaccines in any patient, not just after discharge, but even otherwise. There is no definite evidence, but there were some theories last year that BCG, MMR, and other vaccines can provide non-specific boosting of the immune system, not directly COVID protection, but some enhancement of your immune system that can help to protect against COVID. When is this child going to go to HDU, PICU? The occasional 1 to 2% are not going to follow this path. They are going to deteriorate in the COVID care, in the PCCH, in the moderate COVID care center. If your SpO2 drops below 90% in spite of maximum levels of oxygen that you can give by this method, if there's severe pneumonia with respiratory effort and grunting, this patient is going to need a ventilator. Evidence of shock, oliguria as defined by urine output less than 1 ml per kg per hour, altered sensorium, refractory convulsions. I mentioned to you earlier that MISC preferably should be treated in a HDU or PICU, or if there is clinical bleeding. These are the indications for sending the patient to and of course, ideally, we know all this. Never send a patient directly to your nearest PICU, HDU. Always call and make sure the bed is available. We have seen the situation where parents have running around from one hospital to another or sitting in an ambulance trying to find a bed. I think at least in Mumbai, there has been an excellent war room in each ward where a bed is allotted so the patient can be sent directly rather than running around. There are certain things to do to stabilize the patient before transport, but I'm going to skip these 2 slides because they are applicable to the patient who's being transferred from moderate PCCH to the HDU, but they are simple things. Ensure the airway, make sure the patient is getting oxygen if he's hypoxic, try to give a bolus before he transferred and so on. Keep him comfortable, give him sedative if he's very anxious or thrashing around, and things like that. But let's not go into details in this. And there are some roles that we have told the government that roles to be assigned for the 3 people who are going to staff the ambulance. We have done all this. We have given to the government complete details of who's to be in the ambulance, the doctor, the nurse, and a paramedic, what are their roles, and given complete details of what equipment is required to be put. But of course, this is not really for your consumption here. What do you do in severe COVID? I'm going to just talk on one slide because again, I don't think any of us are going to be involved in acute COVID care. We do all these tests, renal function, liver function. We look for cardiac involvement by pro-BNP, a 2D echo will be required, lactate for shock, an ECG, chest X-ray, ferritin LDH because some of these patients can have this as part of a cytokine storm. Of course, we optimize the oxygen by various methods, prone positioning, steroid, but I will not go into this. This is too much to discuss on one slide. Let me tell you about MISC or MISN. Look at this second case, 4-year-old boy, high fever for 3 days, urticarial rash. This child also has redness of the eyes and redness of the lips, and there's a little tender liver. The mother says this child has never been ill before, but the father had COVID 2 months ago. That should make you think whether this can be COVID-19 or more important, can be something related to COVID-19, and that is your MISC. When should you suspect an MISC? A child or adolescent with fever more than 3 days, urticarial rash like you see in these pictures, bilateral non-purulent conjunctivitis like you see in Kawasaki's disease, and sometimes some of these children almost look like Kawasaki. They have red lips, inflammation of the hands and feet. See this swelling of the hands and feet like sometimes you see in Kawasaki. You can also see something like this in rickets cell infections, which is actually a kind of vasculitis. Very important is reactivation of the BCG scar. If you see this, then it has to be MISC. Child is usually very irritable or can be very prostrate. GI symptoms can occur. There can be tachycardia, tachypnea, oliguria, which are out of proportion to the fever. This is because of the cardiac involvement. They can have myocarditis with cardiac failure, a very poor cardiac output. The cardiac output sometimes drops to just ejection fraction, maybe 25% and so on. Of course, this can occur in any other sepsis. This can be streptococcal infection. This can be a severe gram-negative shock in a small infant and so on. So try to rule those out. But in this background, particularly with the BCG scar activation and the contact with COVID 2 months ago, this is most likely going to be a MISC. How do you work up a suspected MISC? And I'm going to tell you this, although this would be done in the hospital, because step one you can do at your level. This is your step one test that you can do if the patient is just mild symptoms. It will help you to make a diagnosis of MISC even before you can refer the child. CBC, CRP, ESR, these are the inflammatory markers, they will be elevated. Albumin low, SGPT high, serum creatinine maybe higher because of renal involvement. And very important, these two tests. You need the RT-PCR and you need the antibody test also. I mentioned to you this, the antibodies that create the mischief. So most often they are positive in almost 90% of patients. But some of the patients, the antibody levels are not very high. They may be borderline, so they may be missed. And also some patients, I told you, they can present as early as 2 weeks. So the antibody levels may not have risen high. And they may be at this stage even RT-PCR positive. And if they are RT-PCR positive, you know that such a patient cannot go to a non-COVID center. So that's why it's very important to do both these tests, the RT-PCR as well as the antibody test. This is your diagnosis of MISC on laboratory. An absolute lymphocyte count of less than 1,000, drop in the platelets, elevated ESR, CRP, hypoalbuminemia, and as I mentioned, either the antibody or the RT-PCR positive. So if you make a diagnosis, please refer the child to an HD or PICU. This is what will go on there, but I'm not going to talk too much about it. Remember, as I said in the previous slide, do consider differential diagnosis before your results come. If these results come, then yes, your diagnosis is there, but these results may take a day to come. Do consider other bacterial infections, possibility of malaria, dengue, scrub typhus, leptospirosis. You may have to do the requisite clinical examination or laboratory tests for that. But sometimes these patients deteriorate very rapidly. And if the patient is in shock or has life-threatening complication, you will do step 1 and step 2 together. In other words, you're going to refer the patient directly to HDU, PICU, where all this will be done together in one go. And the patient will possibly receive empirical treatment even before the diagnosis is made. But I'm not going to discuss that here again. Now, MISC in children, if we look at it, has got 3 varieties or 3 presentations. One is what was earlier called FIS or febrile inflammatory syndrome. This term is now been dropped and we are referring to these patients as the mild MIS. These actually can be managed at home or possibly in the ward if they are RT-PCR negative. They don't really have a multi-system involvement. That's why we use this different term, febrile inflammatory, because there's no major organ involvement. Which is the multi-system that are involved in MIS? It's the heart, the lungs, and the kidney and the liver. And sometimes the brain, as I mentioned, they can have convulsions and altered sensorium. So these are the major organs. But in FIS, these are not involved. So all you need is paracetamol. If there are high fever, high CRP, you can opt to give low-dose steroid for a week or 2. Some patients may need oxygen or IV fluids. There is hypoxia. But you need to keep monitoring to make sure this patient does not deteriorate into this or this type. Now, the Kawasaki disease-like presentation is fairly common. They look almost like Kawasaki. They have cardiac involvement, but they don't have shock. The treatment is just like Kawasaki. You give IVIG, 2 gram per kg single dose. Also, you give methylprednisolone. This is the dose that is recommended, 2 milligram per kg for 3 to 5 days and then taper. These patients, particularly if they have coronary artery dilatation on the 2D echo, we will give them low molecular weight heparin, like you do in adults with COVID who are admitted. This is the dose, and you follow them, of course, by low dose aspirin for 3 to 6 weeks till they are completely recovered, and a repeat 2D echo is required. A very small number of patients present directly with shock because of poor cardiac output. They require high dose steroids. IVIG can be given if there is associated myocardial dysfunction. All these patients, of course, require low molecular weight heparin also. But remember, the dose of steroid here is different. It's 5 times the dose here, 10 milligram per kg, and taper over 2 weeks. Okay. Now, last few slides on how to manage if the mother is positive COVID at the time of delivery. Appropriate PP is required for the mother and staff in the delivery room, goes without saying. The baby should be resuscitated at least 2 meters away from the mother or possibly in a separate room because there may be aerosolization while you are doing suctioning or intubation if required. The neonate must be tested for SARS-CoV-2 by RT-PCR within 24 hours. You can room in with the mother if both mother and child are stable, whether the RT-PCR is positive or not. Of course, the mother should wear a mask, follow hygiene precautions, but can breastfeed. Breastfeeding is allowed everywhere, unless the mother is so sick and she is herself in shock or something and she cannot feed. If the patient is symptomatic, of course, the baby will be transferred to a sick newborn unit, but otherwise the baby can be discharged along with the mother if they are both asymptomatic. But close follow-up is required for 2 weeks because these patients can develop symptoms of MISN for the next 2 weeks. So you need to tell the parents or the mother to watch out for the red flag signs. I won't repeat them. I listed them in an earlier slide. You have to tell the mother that if that is there, then you need to bring the child back. It's not very common. And actually, vertical transmission from mother to child is only about 2%. So the child is generally RT-PCR negative. But MIS-C is more frequent and doesn't necessarily come with RT-PCR positive. As I told you earlier, it's because the antibodies that are transmitted across the umbilical cord from the placenta to the child, which cause the problem in the baby. The presentation of MISN may be quite variable and non-specific compared to MIS-C. There may be just a little bit of fever, vomiting, poor feeding, lethargy. There may be, of course, rash and petechiae like you see in MIS-C, but child can also come with severe symptoms, neurological, cardiac, or shock, or difficulty in breathing. This may, of course, be any other bacterial infection. There may be other conditions. We have to manage as per MIS-C with age and weight appropriate drugs. I won't go into the details because the child will be in a hospital. You have to, of course, do strict precautions during aerosolized procedures, whether it's during resuscitation or even later. Discharge is only if asymptomatic for 3 days and the child is active and feeding well. And again, defer vaccines for 4 weeks. I'm going to talk about the last couple of slides. I know there are people raising hand, but I will take questions at the end, please. We need to worry about the psychological effect that COVID is having in children. Children are at home. They are not able to go to school. Many of them cannot go anywhere to play. They are not meeting their friends. And if it's a nuclear family and the parents are working from home, they are busy whole day with their laptops or with their office work on the phone, and the child feels neglected and feels alone. There are some older children also have anxiety and fear. They worry whether they will get COVID. Sometimes there's a family member who's been hospitalized or unfortunately passed away. All this can have effect on the children. And I'm seeing several children. In fact, one of my postgraduate students is doing a thesis and finding very high rates of anxiety and depression in children from COVID families in the current pandemic. You need to specifically ask, to look for this. Is the child showing increased irritability or anger or frustration? Is the small child clinging to the mother all the time? Has the child now started thumb sucking or bedwetting, which wasn't doing before? Some older children get too engrossed. They try to cut themselves off from the world by engrossing themselves in a smartphone, a tablet, or watch television all the time. Some children eat a lot or eat very little, or they may not sleep or have difficulty in sleeping or sleep a lot, or they may have change in behavior or withdrawal. They don't seek pleasure in activities or meeting family and friends, or just have crying spells. What do we do in these cases? You need to tell the parents specifically this. Spend time in interacting with the child. It's going to be difficult. There are no servants at home. The mother is doing the housework. They are also doing office work, but they have to take out time to interact with the child. They have to be patient when the child. What happens is they say, don't disturb me. I'm doing this work. Why are you not behaving yourself? Be patient. Avoid offering instant solutions like, oh, you're crying, go eat a chocolate. Display affection readily. Make a schedule where all family members can do something together, whether it's housework, whether it's a play activity, whether it's story time. And you can involve the children in the household work, appreciate whatever work they do, connect them with family and friends if possible on a video chat or a WhatsApp call or whatever, and don't focus too much on academics. It's already a strain for them. And as a doctor, what should you do? You should be available online or even offline so that the parents can address these concerns with you. You need to be proactive in asking for the symptoms and look for the symptoms if the child is coming to your clinic. I've often noticed sometimes the child come to my clinic with some other condition, but I tell the mother, I think this child doesn't look like he looked like 2 months ago. He seems more withdrawn. He doesn't want to talk to me. He doesn't want to have eye contact. So look out for these early signs. Answer questions patiently and to the point. Give these messages that I mentioned on the left proactively. Give positive messages that this pandemic will be over. Even if a child gets the disease, is not going to be very severely affected. 95% chance kuch nahi hoga, theek ho jayega. Give positive messages. But also, if you see danger signs like possibilities of self-harm, the child is trying to not eat at all, go on a starvation diet, severe weight gain or weight loss, do refer for counseling or to a psychiatrist. So this is my talk that I want to tell you about. And this is the slogan that we said the other day. If your children are safe, your house is safe. If your house is safe, the country is safe. And if the country is safe, this world will be safe from COVID-19. Thank you very much. And I will now take questions.
Before we go to question, I would like to introduce two team members who have been working in the background. One is Dr. Sushma. I will pin her video now with Dr. Prabhu. She is our Chief of Operations.
Thank you.
And she manages that things go very smoothly when we are planning. Thank you, Sushma.
Thank you so much.
Second is Preeti. 1 second.
Yes, anything else? So Dr. Sushma wants to say something?
Sushma, you want to say something?
I would like to thank you first for such a wonderful session, and we would like to thank Sir for giving us this platform for all the doctors to listen, because so much we are learning day by day, and we look forward to every Thursday. Not only as a doctor and arranging this whole session, but as a doctor also we learn so much. We are there with him full time, but then it's been very enriching journey, and I'm sure everyone will agree to it that it has been a wonderful experience. And we are really proud to announce that this is our 50th webinar, and we are very happy that you all are together. Thank you, the audience, for making it such a success.
And then this young, pretty lady whose name is Preeti Desai. She is Preeti, she is not pretty.
She is pretty.
She is pretty Desai.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And can you believe she is a mother to a 13-year-old child? I am going to tell her to take lectures for how to age gracefully. Preeti has been the silent worker behind the curtain. Always working, and she's taken the big burden off my head to manage the administration. She does it very smoothly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Now I will introduce you to Dr. Purnima Prabhu, Dr. Swas's better half.
Hello.
Hi, Purnima.
Hello.
So today, Dr. Swas and Purnima will cut a cake for our 50th webinar.
It's always a pleasure. I have known Dr. Asrani since we were in college.
Sit now.
Young days.
Sit here.
We'll
try to squeeze in both in the same screen.
I know, but we want to see the cake. Raise the cake a little.
Yes.
We are obliged to have this opportunity to be on the 50th year.
Yeah.
Iconic.
This is the cake. We want to celebrate the 50th webinar of Inches. This is a great moment. Dr. Asrani is doing such good work on behalf of Inches. And I am glad that I have Purnima to cut the cake along with me. Remember, we are cutting it together. Purnima is the representative of all of you who are listening to me today, because she happens to be a family practitioner. So she and I are going to cut. So please think that we are going to cut this on behalf of all of you. Right.
But
Let me show you the cake.
I'll just take a photo.
That's the cake
Very
which
good.
we are going to cut. And congratulations to Inches for this 50th. Purnima, come, hold the.
1 minute. I'll just take a photo.
You want to take a photo? 1 minute.
Hold it.
She's going to take a photo which we'll probably put up somewhere. Thank you.
We'll send it to you, Chandu.
Shall we cut the cake because they're waiting
Yeah,
for
please
questions?
cut, please cut.
Hold it up so they can see us cutting it.
Happy
Happy 50th.
50th to Inches. Yeah.
And many more to come.
Many
Yes,
more to
yes.
come.
Family physicians are feeding the
Consultants.
consultant.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Right.
Purnima. I'll ask questions now, Suhas.
Okay.
Now, all family members in a small house may wear masks, but they all remove it during sleep. How does it help effective quarantine?
Oh, okay. It is difficult to wear a mask when you're sleeping. Even if you're wearing, it's probably going to come off when you move in your sleep. But we do know that aerosolization is more when we talk, particularly if you talk loudly, if you are singing, if you are coughing, if you are sneezing. So none of these activities are going to happen when you are sleeping. So it's less likely. It is not zero. I agree with you, it's not zero, but it's practically impossible to wear a mask when you sleep. And I know that I was hospitalized for COVID and I was asked to wear a mask, and when I was sleeping, it would always come off. So even in the COVID care center, people, you cannot wear the mask all the time. But one thing you can do is keep the room well ventilated. Try to avoid using an air conditioner. Keep the windows open, keep the fan on, so that whatever viruses are liberated during normal breathing will be disseminated and go out of the room rather than circulate.
There has been a lot of talk of virus discharge through feces. Now, in
Yes.
smaller houses, when people use the same WC or latrine, how does it affect positively or negatively?
Okay. Yes, there can be spread via the toilet use, particularly as you said from the feces. The virus is not excreted in the urine, but it comes out in the feces because there are ACE2 receptors in the gut. Okay, what can you do? I mentioned earlier that you need to ask for the home conditions. If you're quarantining at home, if there are 2 toilets, it's ideal. Then one toilet can be reserved for the patient. All the other family members use the other toilet. If that's not possible, then disinfect the toilet after every use. The other thing that is important is that if you have a Western style toilet, that is a commode, keep the lid down when you flush, because otherwise the aerosolization occurs and the virus can be disseminated in the bathroom or in the toilet. Use an exhaust fan. And of course, toilets are never air conditioned, so there's no issue about that. But use an exhaust fan and try to keep a gap of half to 1 hour after the patient has used the toilet. This is what you can do. But if this is not possible, then, and some patients are in a chawl where there's a common toilet for several houses, then such a patient may have to be sent to the PCCH, even if he's a mild case.
In home care, mild COVID, any indication of chest X-ray?
Chest X-ray, no.
Any indication of steroid in home care by us?
I said that very clearly.
No, because people are asking, family doctors love to give steroid. So I also wanted to emphasize once again, at our level, no steroids in children.
Yes, not to be given. And with due respect to my fellow pediatricians, some pediatricians also very fond of steroids. So I don't think it's only the family practitioners. Some of us are guilty anyway, whatever level we practice. But yes, no steroids in the first week, definitely. And if it's beyond first week, as I said, it is not mild COVID. So at a family practice level, no steroids at all.
Okay. do we consider inhaled budesonide for children?
Okay, I think somebody is referring to the STOIC trial. It was called the STOIC trial, which was held in UK, and I think it was reported in the Lancet. They mentioned that by giving budesonide inhaled therapy, there can be reduction in progress of COVID from mild to moderate to severe. Certain caveats I must mention. One is the fact that this is a single study. Second is the fact that this is only in adults. They were all above 18 years of age. So I don't know whether it's applicable to children. You may have to ask some adult physician whether they have any studies in India or experience in using budesonide in adults for COVID. But I want to say something about inhaled corticosteroid. We know that inhaled corticosteroid definitely reduce the exacerbations in asthma. Do you know that? And there is some evidence that even when there is an acute exacerbation, a person who's on inhaled corticosteroid preventive therapy, if you double the dose or give a high dose for a couple of days, he will respond faster. We also know that 70 to 80% of exacerbations of acute asthma in children, and somebody is already asthmatic, is following a viral infection. So it can also happen after COVID. So my advice to you is, if there is a person who's already an asthmatic, then definitely emphasize that he needs to continue to take the inhaled corticosteroids. And it might not be a bad idea to give the double dose for maybe a week or so during the acute COVID first week. The other thing is, there are some children, and we generally hope that children outgrow their asthma and can go off the inhaled corticosteroids. I have some patients who are 5, 6, 7 years of age who received inhaled corticosteroids for 2, 3 years when they were a toddler, but they have stopped now. Such a child, if he develops COVID, my advice to him is start inhaled corticosteroid. Not really because it will prevent the severity of COVID, but I don't want this child to get an exacerbation, because if now he starts getting cough, if he starts getting breathlessness because of asthma, I will be confused whether it's a moderate COVID or whether it's simply an asthmatic attack, and unnecessarily start worrying. So this would be the second thing that I would suggest. Would you give inhaled corticosteroids to everybody else who are not asthmatic to start with? At least in children, my answer is no. We know that inhaled corticosteroids have increased risk of pneumonia, not only in asthmatic children, but even more in patients with COPD. So it has to be used with caution. So I'm not going to recommend it for all. Thank you.
Pulse oximeter in children. Remember, we had a talk the other day, so please give those guidelines to people.
Right. There are problems in measuring the pulse oximetry in children. You do get probes which are smaller in size. The problem really is the digits are very small. So what can happen is the reading will not come because the pulse, the wave doesn't come, and therefore the reading doesn't come. So there are a few tricks you can do. You do get infantile oximeters that you can use for small children, where the machine is very small, so it will fit the finger of the child. The other trick you can do is that you can use the pulse oximeter that you use for older children or adults onto the big toe, or in a little older child, even on the ear lobule, where it can generate the pulse and therefore give you a reading. So these are some of the things you can do.
Temperature, we should take armpit or the infrared temperature?
The armpit is ideal. Everywhere worldwide now, armpit is the standard. And the other recommendation is always use an electronic thermometer, not a mercury thermometer. Several reasons. I think, mercury thermometer is not easily available now because of the poisoning that happened in a few cases after mercury was ingested. And also possibly an electronic thermometer is more accurate. And because you wait for that, that beep to happen, and you don't pick it out too early because you're not supposed to pick it out till the beep happens.
There is a lot of talk of giving influenza vaccine to all children below 12 now. I know it is a practice we were following always, but you recommend that now we should be giving all children?
Okay. To state first of all what is obvious is that the Indian Academy of Pediatrics recommends that every child below the age of 5 should take an annual flu vaccine. And this, of course, is the practice in the Western world. In Europe, US, everybody, not even children, everybody gets a flu shot every year before the onset of the flu season, which for them is, of course, winter. For us in Mumbai, the flu season is monsoon. So this is the right time when the vaccine is due. Now, so it is anyway to be given below 5. The ICMR actually at one stage had made a recommendation that every child should receive flu vaccine till the age of 8. Also, if the child has any comorbidities, particularly related to cardiovascular or pulmonary problems, like cystic fibrosis, bad asthma, congenital heart disease, or anything like that, then also the flu shot should be given. So what I'm trying to tell you is the recommendations are already there. We are only emphasizing now, not because influenza vaccine will prevent COVID, but the fact is, I just mentioned right at the beginning that influenza also occurs in the monsoon. So, if we can prevent influenza cases by giving influenza vaccine, we can prevent the anxiety that the parent mother will have, because she will think every fever now is going to be COVID. So, it will prevent influenza. So, it will prevent fevers in general. It will prevent the rush in the fever clinic. It will prevent unnecessary overuse of RT-PCR, because as I said on my very third slide, COVID mild cases can look like an ordinary flu. How do you distinguish? And if there's an elderly grandmother or somebody with heart disease in the home, you have no option but to rule out COVID. So you'll have to do an RT-PCR on that child. So whatever you can prevent fever cases, you should try to prevent. We don't really have a vaccine for malaria. We don't have a vaccine for dengue, but we have a vaccine for flu. Why not use it? That's the logic.
Okay, in suppose 2-year-old child is admitted for ICU or PICU, they will admit without mother, no? There.
Yes, in the ICU, nobody will allow the mother. Obviously, and there the child will probably be unconscious, will be ventilated. I mean, there's no point in having the mother there.
A question not related to COVID. What is the minimum age for influenza? I think
influenza vaccine 6 months.
Year, no?
6 months. 6 months of age. There were another couple of cases in the chat box, if I may answer.
Yeah, sure.
One is, what is the dose of vitamin C that is recommended? And the answer is none. There is no evidence that vitamins help. But at the same time, I did mention on the slide that you may give multivitamins. The reason for this is, we are, at least in India, very drug conscious. You go to a doctor, कुछ दवाई नहीं लिखा तो नहीं चलता, कुछ तो लिखना चाहिए. So what is the harm in writing a multivitamin? That's the idea. There is no real evidence that you give any amount of any vitamin, including zinc, that will help to prevent. And in fact, there are some stories about high dose zinc causing worsening of mucormycosis cases. So I don't think we should go for high dose vitamin C, high dose zinc, or anything like that. A routine multivitamin supplement primarily to allay anxiety and give the mother something to do is what I would recommend. The other question I saw is a question about ivermectin. I think there is no definite recommendation as of now for ivermectin, and I would not recommend. I am not using it in any of my patients.
Okay, Suhas, do you not recommend influenza vaccine after 5 years or?
No, it can be given at any age. What we are saying is, below 5, please give every child every year.
Every year.
Because influenza is more common in this age group. And also, if it does happen, the complications like a pneumonia or spread is much more. Remember that influenza is an annual event. And we know that once you had 2-3 episodes, you are more or less immune. So hopefully after the age of 5, you are less likely to get influenza, which is the logic. But there's no harm in giving influenza vaccine every year, even to an older child. And particularly in the COVID scenario, we are recommending that at least this year, give every child. Why only till 5?
Okay, now we have audience from across India, including we have a Dr. Ashok Madan from United States.
Oh, I see. Okay.
He has written in US, we have Pfizer, Moderna and AstraZeneca available. Which would be preferred? Can you comment in children? If once they give.
Once they give, so far there is no data for AstraZeneca, but only Pfizer and Moderna can be given. Let's see what the data for children says. Sorry?
Not below
about the
12
age of 12. About the age of 12, Pfizer and Moderna are licensed in the US.
Okay.
But they're not available in India. So this is really a hypothetical question. And AstraZeneca is not licensed below the age of 18 as of now.
Okay. Suppose a child gets seizure in the clinic or a domiciliary setting before we shift. What medicine we should give in emergency for seizure?
Okay. Now, the thing to do is maintain the airway, maintain the oxygenation, and if the seizure lasts more than 60 seconds, you give midazolam nasal spray to abort the seizure. Intramuscular diazepam works too slowly, is not recommended. In a seizing child in your clinic, it's very difficult to find an IV and give IV lorazepam or midazolam, which is recommended. The easiest way to do in your clinic to abort a seizure, besides maintaining the airway and giving oxygen, is to give Midacep nasal spray. It's available from Cipla and 2-3 other companies. And depending on the age, 2 to 5 puffs in each nostril helps. The absorption occurs from the nasal mucosa, and that aborts the seizure.
Do we have to actually measure urine output or just keep a rough idea that child is passing urine like before?
Rough idea will do. I mentioned to you that one of the red flag signs is not passing urine for 6 hours.
Yeah.
So we don't really mention any amount. But I think mothers are smart. They realize how much their child passes normally, and they will really realize if it is much less than normal.
If history of COVID contact or RT-PCR positive is more than 3 months, can we suspect MIS if symptomatic now?
Less likely, but I will not rule it out. We might find some cases reported even more than 3 months. This is a new disease. COVID itself is a year old. MIS-C was recognized maybe about 9 months ago. So far, at least the cases we have seen are not beyond 3 months, but you might find an occasional case. We also do not know whether COVID can occur a second time even in children. If so, then it might appear more than 3 months after the first episode, but the child might have got an asymptomatic second episode and then get MIS-C. So I would not rule it out. If the symptoms look like that, please suspect. During a pandemic, our first job, see, if you don't suspect, you will never think about it. So high index of suspicion is always set, and I think that's important for us now.
Now, Suhas, when in monsoon, in acute febrile illness, we normally see joint infections, like not joint, dengue with UTI, dengue with malaria. Has any studies been done on COVID and other viral ailments or
Yes.
other bacterial ailments?
Yes. In fact, there are some guidelines now on simultaneous COVID and dengue.
COVID and
Dengue fever.
dengue fever.
Yeah. So, but let's not get into that. It's complicated because there are a lot of issues once you get dengue and COVID. Because in dengue, you need to give high fluid intake. And for patients with COVID who are admitted, often they have myocarditis. So we need to give restricted fluid intake. So it gets complicated, but I don't think that's relevant for family physicians. So I will not get into that.
So there is a direct compliment for you from Lionel D'Souza. Dr. Suhas, you are so good and you simplified the topic to such an extent. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Lionel.
Can children continue outdoor games with masks on? The question is not complete. COVID positive children cannot, other children can.
Right? But you know what happens during play, Dr. Asrani, during play, children often remove their mask or it falls off if they are running. So you have to be careful. So I always tell parents, as far as possible, play with children of your own family or known people. Don't send them to a park or to, in the society common garden where there are so many children you don't know anything about. You still need to take precaution. And what is going to happen now is that children, once they get infected, they might come home and infect the parents. Till now, it was the other way around. Children were at home, parents were going out, but now children will start going to school. Now, because they are cooped at home, parents are allowing them to go out and play. and they might come and, acquire the infection, and very dangerously, children might be asymptomatic. So you won't even know that they are infected, and they will manage to infect other members of the family.
Do petechial rash be a sign of MIS-C? No fever, but past history of COVID in mother.
Yes, petechial rash can occur following COVID. Several reasons for that. I mentioned to you when I discussed MIS-C that a drop in the platelet count occurs. Less than 150,000 is what you normally see. But if it does drop low enough, yes, you will see petechial like you see in dengue. Also, we know that we have seen one case of ITP, idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura following COVID, which we know can follow any viral infection. So it can also follow COVID. So we have seen ITP following COVID in one patient. So yes, you can see petechial rash there if the platelet count is low.
On which day of fever should we do blood investigation?
Are you talking about COVID?
COVID.
In COVID, not before the 4th day. But if the fever does go on for more than 4th day, if the RT-PCR is positive or the rapid antigen test is positive, I would recommend you do no test. You just send the child off to a COVID care center. They will do everything that is needed, which I listed on the slide, what tests we do for a patient who is moderate COVID. But if you are not sure it's COVID, if the RT-PCR was negative, and we know that RT-PCR can be false negative, of course, but you are not sure because there is no positive test, then you will follow the guidelines that I took in my earlier talk where I discussed approach to fever. Dr. Asrani, you remember, you had asked me to take.
Yes.
I have discussed what to do for a child on the 4th day of fever. So I will not repeat myself here.
Only redness of eyes, no fever. Can we suspect?
I think high index of suspicion calls for the fact that you must think of it. But yes, as I mentioned, MIS-C, fever is often the presenting symptom. But what happens is the fever may come and go for a day. The redness of the eyes may persist for 3-4 days. I had one patient who just came yesterday to my clinic, who I'll just mention by initials AK, because they're not supposed to identify patients. She came to my clinic with history of fever for 2-3 days earlier. And the mother said, "Iske aankh laal ho gaye aur laal nahi ja raha." And I got her test done and she was MIS-C. She had high CRP, not very high. I think it was 11.4. But she had SARS-CoV-2 antibody positive, and the mother mentioned that both the parents had COVID in the month of April. And this child also had some fever at that time. So obviously this is the FIS that I mentioned, the mild MIS-C that I simply manage at home with low-dose steroids. There is no multi-system involvement here. But yes, this child had MIS-C with just red eyes.
What, can we have your permission to put this video on YouTube for people to see again?
No problem at all. I'll be happy.
Okay, so participant, this will be available on YouTube. Of course, there is a replay tomorrow, then we'll give you the link to YouTube. You can see it again also.
Right?
There are a lot of questions, but they tend to become too specific. And I think people are still not understanding. There is somebody asked the question, should we do blood culture, prove BNP and all? All that is if you are admitting patients under your care, if you are a pediatrician, not otherwise.
Right. I've tried to address my talk to family physicians. And there's a lot to be said there. I've already consumed 1 hour. So I didn't want to talk about patients after they are admitted too much.
Okay. So there is a comment for you, Dr. Pratibha Angane.
Right.
Thanks for such an informative lecture, Dr. Prabhu. This reminds me of bedside clinics used to take for us in our undergraduate days.
Okay, thank you. But I do believe in clinical medicine. And I know that family practitioners should be the best at clinical medicine. Because you cannot resort to a lot of tests. You should not, in fact. And while you send to a consultant, the first thing that happens is a huge list of tests are done. And I know that how difficult clinical medicine is. And I hope there are no cardiologists here in this listening to me. But I must make a comment here that you do see, for example, murmurs in children, which are what we call innocent murmurs. And you do need an extensive history and clinical examination to make sure that it is an innocent murmur. You look for the second heart sound, which is loud or not. Are there symptoms suggestive of left heart failure, right heart failure? Is there a third heart sound? Is the liver enlarged? Are there signs of congestive cardiac failure and so on? But I asked a cardiologist once, how do you define an innocent murmur? And his answer was one in which the 2D echo is normal. So that's a person who's not even looking at clinical medicine. I don't think we should do that. We must make a clinical assessment, and that's very important whether it's an innocent murmur or any other clinical condition.
Any role of vitamin D?
No,
No.
there is no evidence that vitamin D cures or improves COVID. However, I must mention that vitamin D deficiency is fairly common, particularly in the last 1 year because children are not going out. Because we know that for vegetarians, sunlight is the main source of vitamin D. So it would not be harmful to advise vitamin D supplement for every patient, not that it's going to make the COVID better. Remember, two things you must do when the child comes to you, whether he comes to you for fever or anything else. Advise about nutrition, advise about immunization. That's the family practitioner's duty. So from that point of view, advising vitamin D, advising sunlight, advising dietary changes that will improve his vitamin D intake, particularly in the lockdown when he's not being out for a vegetarian patient, is very important. And also, as I said in my slide once, try and make sure that his immunization is up to date. Many children have not completed the immunization in the last 1 year because of the lockdown, not able to go, afraid to go. Doctor ke clinic mein jayega to COVID ho jayega and things like that. So therefore, two things every family practitioner should do: advise about nutrition, advise about immunization, and of course, advise about hygiene.
Okay, there is one comment. I am your classmate, Dr. Nirmala Dharod Veera. Congratulations, Dr. Prabhu. This is excellent. Dr. Veera, even I remember you from KM.
Yes. She is now Dharod, but she was Veera earlier.
And now she is Dharod. Some people are raising hands. Please type the question into the thing, no? Because today we are not allowing the unmuting of the thing. AVPU full form.
Okay. A is alert, that means responding to you. V is vocal, that means if you ask a question, the person answers. P is pain, that means the person is neither awake nor talking, but will respond to pain. That means if you pinch him, he will move or he'll make a sound. And U is unconscious. It's a very simple score for finding neurological status. Of course, the standard one is something we call Glasgow Coma Scale, GCS, which we use in the ICU. उसमें 15 का scale है वो 0 to 15. वो छोड़ो मुश्किल है. But AVPU is very easy to do.
I think with that, Suhas, I would once again thank you for this amazing lecture. Thank you, Purnima, for...
Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No, it is our this thing, and we may trouble you once in 3-4 months again.
I hope there is no pandemic every 3-4 months.
So
give me a different topic.
Other things.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And congratulations to Inches for the 50th webinar. May golden turn to diamond and a century and even beyond. Thank you.
You know, the only purpose of me conducting this series is I want family doctors to become clinicians